First Chronicles chapter 10, let's pray together. Our God and our Father, we're so thankful for this another Lord's Day. We're so thankful for the blessings of the past week. We're thankful for the measure of health that we have that gives us the ability to be here this morning. We're thankful for our ability to understand and reason. And as we continue to look and study from your word, we pray that we would use that ability while we have it to increase our faith, Holy Father, to understand how you have dealt with mankind through the ages and to see where those lessons still apply in our lives. We're so grateful that you love us. We're so grateful that you have provided the way in Jesus. And we pray, Holy Father, that we would strive every day to become more like him so that we might be the best people that we can be. In Jesus' name, amen. First Chronicles chapter 10 reads, "Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Gilboa." Let me pause. Two things. Sister Mercedes continues to improve. She will have another treatment that I'm assuming is for her liver. Brother Ruperto tells me that this past week, as she has been checking her blood sugar in the morning and the evening, that her blood sugar has remained fine and she has needed no insulin, which seems to imply that her kidneys, which seemingly in the beginning might have been involved when she was having trouble with her liver, are functioning properly. So that's the news I can tell you about that. I'll keep you updated on that. And we received pictures this week that the church in San Cristobal that we had the gospel meeting with has began construction on their property. So you might remember the photos we showed you, and it was just a piece of land, and there was quite a bit of work. Now there's labor going on and walls being built. And so again, the brethren there sure wanted me to thank y'all, because again, with the money that y'all sent with us, that we were able to leave, that was added to what they had saved, and now they're beginning the process of building a building. So those two things. As we begin reading First Chronicles chapter 10, or as you read in preparation, and if you compared it with where we're at now, there's a war going on between Saul and Israel and the Philistines, and in fact, Saul and his sons are going to be killed. That's where we're at. And so you're thinking, wow, there's just a lot that the chronicler just skipped over. I mean, if we just went back, just kind of thinking in 1 Samuel chapter 1, the book of Samuel, in fact, really, as you begin reading 1 Chronicles chapter 10, what has been skipped is 1 Samuel, the whole book. Because if you would read the last chapter of 1 Samuel, chapter 30, you will read about Saul and his death and the death of his son. So everything else prior to that, beginning in chapter 1, the chronicler, he doesn't say anything about that. So remember, though, when the Chronicles is being written, it's being written to the people who have returned from captivity. So remember, the Assyrians took the Israelites into captivity. That's the northern 10 tribes. And then the Babylonians become the world empire, and they take Judah and they just engulf whoever was to the north. And then after that, you're going to have, we'll study it at some point in time, you're going to have the return under Ezra and Nehemiah, these different happenings that bring some of the people back. Well, it's these people that have been brought back that are resettling the land that these two books are written to. So the chronicler would be inspired, whoever he might have been. And so there's going to be some details he's going to leave out. Some things are going to be exactly the same, and he's going to take a different angle on some things. So it's not going to be a carbon copy of what we've already looked at. But again, if you think about where we're picking up, what's not mentioned? Well, Samuel, his birth, and you think about everything that was involved in there as far as his parents, or specifically his mother, was concerned. If I'm going back and just looking at 1 Samuel chapter 8, I'm reminded that the people wanted a king because everybody else had a king. In fact, when we looked at those chapters of names and we got to the descendants of Esau, or the Edomites, there was even a verse said that they had kings before Israel ever had kings. So there's other countries around the Israelites who already have kings, and they wanted king as well. And you remember, Samuel takes that very personally. He believes they've rejected who? They think he's rejected him. But God said, Samuel, they haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. So they anoint Saul to be their first king. And he's going to reign for about how many years? 40. Because when you look at the kingdom, under Saul and under David and under Solomon, the kingdom was what? United. All 12 under one king. And they're all going to rule about 40 years. So you can look at Saul. He's going to get about 40. David's going to rule about 40. And then Solomon's going to rule about 40. So the kingdom will be divided into those three kings. But it will be under Solomon's son, Rehoboam, that the kingdom will be divided. And now you're going to have the 10 tribes to the north. They began under the leadership of Jeroboam the first, and you have Rehoboam ruling to the south. And now we have Israel, and now we have Judah. And then begins the story of those two nations as they battle one another till finally, because of idolatry, they'll be given over into captivities. That's what lies ahead. But Saul, he's the first king. He's anointed king. But then we find shortly thereafter that Saul disobeys. He disobeys in a couple of ways. But if you remember chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, again, God gave him a specific command regarding the Amalekites. Their king, their people, their animals, everything. They was just supposed to destroy everything. And Saul ends up not following completely what God told him to do. And as a result, he was rejected by God as far as being king. Well, we could look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, and now here comes David. He's just a young boy at this time, a teenager, but Samuel's going to make a trek to his house. He's going to come there, and through the process of time, after he goes through all the other brothers of David, finally David will come, show up, and he anoints him. If you're looking at for a turning point in the life of David or a turning point in the life of Saul, I'll read it to you. 1 Samuel 16 says, verse 13, Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him, David, in the midst of his brethren. You're going to be king some point. And the Spirit of Jehovah came mightily upon David from that day forward, forever changing the life of David. But as it relates to Saul, if you're thinking, well, where was the turning point in his life? It had already been the disobedience to the commands of God. But verse 14 follows, now the Spirit of Jehovah departed from Saul. So you have in one case the Spirit of Jehovah coming mightily upon David, and the result of that is what happened in the life of David overall. And then you have the Spirit of the Lord, or Jehovah, departing from Saul, and the result of that was everything began to decline from this day forward. Well, the famous chapter of 1 Samuel 17, again, David and his conquering of Goliath, and then beginning in chapter 18 and pretty much through the end of 1 Samuel, you have Saul in hot pursuit of David. Really, Saul losing his mind in many ways and just not able to reason anymore. Can't even listen to reason when even his own son is trying to say, Dad, you're acting like a crazy man. What's the matter with you? And yet he was possessed in a sense because he was so caught up with David and what was going to happen in the kingdom of David. Finally, Samuel will die. That was heartbreaking. And then as 1 Samuel ends, Israel is at war with the Philistines. So that's what you have as an overview in 1 Samuel. So again, you might want to make a note maybe in 1 Chronicles 10, something right there that pretty much everything that's happened prior to that is everything that you could read in the book of 1 Samuel. But now, as 1 Samuel came to an end, and as we pick up here, the Philistines, they fought hard against Israel. And the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Saul and after his sons. And the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. And the battle was sore against Saul, and the archers overtook him. The American Standard reads, and he was distressed by reason of the archers. Yours probably reads something about him being wounded. Is that right? So now Saul's been wounded, and if we take into consideration his subsequent actions, he feels as though he has been mortally wounded. He's dying. That's the idea. Saul says to his armor bearer, in light of his current condition, in light of the arrows that are likely in him, and he's dying, he says, draw your sword, verse 4, thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and abuse me or make a mock of me. But his armor bearer would not. See, he's got a different armor bearer here. You know who his first armor bearer was? David. David was his first armor bearer. He had that responsibility, and he would also play some kind of instrument when Saul would be possessed with an evil spirit, and that would bring Saul some relief. But he's got another armor bearer now, and this armor bearer would not do what the king asked because he was afraid to do that. Therefore, Saul took his sword and fell upon it, and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he likewise fell upon his sword and died. So you might want to marry that story there with how 1 Samuel 30 and 2 Samuel 1 begins, because there's another sort of story interjected there about someone who comes upon Saul and something that Saul asks him to do, and he doesn't do it. He does it, but then he takes some things with him, and that's not going to go well for him. But I'll let you go back and look at that if you're not remembering that part. So Saul died, and his 3 sons and all his house died together. Any comments on that or anything that we've looked at so far? And when all the men of Israel that were in the valley saw that they fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their cities and they fled. And now, with their cities forsaken, the Philistines came and they dwelt in the cities. It came to pass on the morrow when the Philistines came to strip the slain, to take the spoil of those that they had killed, they found Saul and his sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. So they take everything off of him. They also took off his head, took his armor, and they sent into the land of the Philistines round about these things as proof. Look what we've done. And along with that, carrying the tidings unto their idols. So the Philistines here would believe that those that they worship, the idols that they worship, would be responsible for the victory here. Took them to their idols and to their people. They put Saul's armor in the house of their gods, and they fastened his head in the house of Dagon. You remember anything about this Dagon before? Has he ever come up prior?
They took the Ark of the Lord and put it in with his temple. I don't know what they call it, but anyway. And the first night, their god Dagon was bowed down to the temple when they came in the next day, and then the next night, his hands and feet, his head, I can't remember, were severed and.
Yeah, so then we go back and to see the history of the ark in the early battles between Israel and Israelites and the Philistines captured the ark and they took it. And as was stated, they put it in their own temple with Dagon, and that didn't work out. And then they started having a lot of problems as far as their health was concerned. Boils, and just it wasn't going well for them. So after 7 months, they frustratedly gave up and sent the ark away. That's one time that we read about Dagon. We read about him again another time prior to that. In fact, it would have been during the time of the judges. It would have had something to do with a judge who had great strength. In fact, his final act of strength happened to be in a temple, and people were worshiping the god Dagon. And that man, starts with an S, he died when the roof collapsed and killed more people on that day than he had killed in his rule as a judge, right? Samuel, that was his name? Oh, Samson, that was his name. Okay, so that's two other instances where we see Dagon come up. I believe, if I remember right, he was a fish god. I believe that's correct. I hadn't looked it up in a while, but that's what comes to my mind. Fishing's not on my mind, but that's what comes up. So we see how that here they fastened his head on the house of Dagon, and then that's what's happened. But then you have these people, all of Jabesh Gilead, they heard what the Philistines had done to Saul. In verse 12, all the valiant men arose, took away the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons, brought them to Jabesh, buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh, and fasted for 7 days. Chapter 10, verse 13 and 14 summarizes, so Saul died for the trespass. I have a marginal reading on that. For Saul died in the trespass. For or in the trespass which he committed against Jehovah. Well, what was that? Because of the word of Jehovah, which he kept not. And also, for that he asked counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire thereby, and inquired not of Jehovah. Therefore he, God, slew him, and turned the kingdom unto David the son of Jesse. I thought the Philistines were the ones who began the process of killing Saul, and then he finished it off himself. Isn't that what we read? What am I reading here? Is there a contradiction here? Because I'm reading something about, it says, Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against Jehovah because of the word of Jehovah, which he kept not, also for that which he counseled, inquired not of Jehovah. Therefore he, God, slew him. How do I put those two together? God can use whoever he wants for whatever purpose. And how come Brother Jim can make that kind of statement? Because somebody else may be thinking, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. Yes, he can, because he starts with an S. He's sovereign. And because he's sovereign, what does that mean he can do? Anything he wants. And you know what? No offense to anybody. Even if you struggle with that, you're going to have to get past that, because you're thinking like I might think with a human mind. And your thoughts and my thoughts are not Isaiah chapter 55, his thoughts. And your ways and my ways of thinking are not his ways of thinking. He's at a whole other level that we can't even comprehend. And so however he chooses to work out his plan in regards to people, the reason things don't work out for Saul, the reason that he's not able to die in the Lord, die in a right relationship with the Lord, because his heart was set on disobedience. If we studied his life, which we did a few months back or longer now, I'll be reminded that basically you would say, well, his practice, his habit was he just committed sin. That's what his life looked like. He just didn't live a righteous life. And you said in contrast to that, you had David, and his overall habit was he practiced righteousness. And because this man, this king, because his habit was sin, a couple of those are pointed out. You didn't keep the word of Jehovah. In which way? He told him, you go down, and as far as Amalekites are concerned, you go down and you destroy them all. That's what I want you to do. And the only way Saul could have rendered obedience fully to God was he'd have done that. That's what God said. That's what I'm going to do. We prayed a while ago before we even started class that we would look into these things and that these things would help us. And how does that help us? Well, I have a lot of things that I can read about over here in the New Testament that are things God has said, this is what you need to do. I don't have my choice. I don't have the choice to say, you know what? If I feel like doing that, I'm going to do that. Or I'm going to do some of those things, but some of those things just don't sit well with me. That's not the attitude I should have if I want to be righteous and pleasing to God. If I don't want my end to be like Saul's, then I'm going to have the heart to say, okay, if that's what you said, if those are your commands, I will accept that they are not grievous. I will do those, because to do those means I will find his favor. He didn't keep the word. And then when he sought counsel, he did the very thing that he had known was wrong. He had gotten rid of all the witchcraft, all the necromancers, all these various people that God has said, that's not going to go on in my people. And he went and sought one of those. Remember where she lived? Started with an E, I think. It ends with an N-D-O-R, right? Endor, I think that's where she was, and that's where he went. And you know what? She had power. She didn't have no power, but God did allow someone to come up when she conjured him up. And who was that? Who was still who he was when he was alive? Samuel. Samuel was still Samuel, even though Samuel had been dead. You mean he wasn't somebody else different after no, he's still Samuel. Just like all you, if we could just name all your names right now, I can see you. I know who you are. Time goes on. We're going to pass from this life. When you pass this life, guess who you're still going to be? You're still going to be who you are. You're not changing that. We got many examples. Moses was still him. Elijah, that's a long time after, right? So you have these sins that he committed, and he died for these trespasses. The Lord took care of that, and now the kingdom is turned over to David. Comments, chapter 10. Yes, sir.
An interesting observation, though it would need some consideration on exactly what might be the purpose of it, is if you look at verse 4 through the end of the chapter, just about every verse makes a reference to either Saul dying or a reference to him already being dead. So either he died or it comments on his head or his body being taken somewhere. I'm not sure exactly what the implications of that might be, but it is interesting to realize that it comments on it so often in that chapter.
Okay, yeah, all right. Anything else? All right. Chapter 11 begins, then all Israel gathered themselves to David unto Hebron, saying, behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. There's a parallel reading of this, 2 Samuel chapter 5. They go on to say, in times past, even when Saul was king, it was you, David, you're the one that led us out and brought us in Israel. And Jehovah thy God said unto thee, we know this, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over my people Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king, to Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before Jehovah, and they anointed David king over Israel according to the word of Jehovah by Samuel, who's now dead. What we read here in chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, this is not happening immediately after the death of Saul, because after the death of Saul, someone else is going to rule over Israel for a couple of years. Remember? Starts with an I, Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth. I'm looking at 2 Samuel chapter 2, just as a reminder. Saul had a son, and his name was Ishbosheth. And he's going to be made to be king over the people, and he's going to rule for a couple of years. That's 2 Samuel chapter 2, We also see more of it in chapter 4, but specifically Abner, 2 Samuel 2 and verse 8, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, had taken Ishbosheth, the son of Saul. They brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead. And now you have all these people who are following him, basically everybody still, all those who aren't following David. Remember, David's just going to rule in Hebron, and he's going to rule in Hebron again for 7.5 years. But there's going to be a time here where people are following this guy Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth, in verse 10, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigns for 2 years. So as I began reading chapter 11 and verse 1, once Israel gathered themselves to David, well, some time has passed. Things don't work out for Ishbosheth in regards to his rule. If you read on, chapter 4, he'll be assassinated. Doesn't work out well for the two people who assassinated him either when they brought that news to David. But again, we've already looked at that. Maybe we're even kind of remembering that. But now time has passed, at least a couple of years, maybe 4 or 5 years has passed. And now Israel has gathered, and they recognize, David, he's going to be king. So David and all Israel, verse 4, went to Jerusalem, and the same is Jebus. And the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, were there. So I mentioned this before, and I'm mentioning this again because we think about the city of Jerusalem and its importance. Its importance throughout the history of these people. And yet, its importance is just now beginning. Prior to this, we haven't been focusing on Jerusalem. You're right, we haven't even talked about it. Yeah, because it hasn't been important. It doesn't even belong to these people. It won't belong to them completely for quite some time. So much time has passed. But here we are. They've been in the land all this time. And finally, now we're getting around to this city that's going to become so important in their history. At this point in time, it's owned by these Jebusites. And they call it Jebus. And these people who lived in Jebus, they said to David, when David basically came up, in essence, to take it, they said, no, we're not giving in to you. And so David then, because he was a warrior and had a lot of people with him, he took the stronghold of, what does your version say? Zion. Now I'm thinking, wow, look at all these terms. I've got this term already, this Jebus, where these Jebusites lived, and now I'm seeing that David took the stronghold of Zion, and that is the same as the what? City of David. So I got Jebus, I got Zion, I got the city of David. I'm not talking about different places, one and the same. And David said then, whoever smites the Jebusites first, I'm going to make him chief. I'm going to make him captive. There goes Joab. He makes his place. He's now chief because he did that. So David dwelt in the stronghold. Therefore, they called it the city of David. He built the city round about him. Now construction begins. We may call it expansion. From Milo, even round about, Joab repaired the rest of the city, and David waxed greater and greater, for Jehovah of hosts was with him. It'd be interesting. You may have maps in your Bible. I don't know if you do or not. But if you have maps, you might find maybe something as it begins to the progression of the city of Jerusalem. This Jebus that will be Jerusalem, or this place now also Zion, or this city of David. And when you see it initially at this point, when David himself conquers and takes this city, you're talking about a city as far as length or going up and down about 5 football fields. That's that. And wide only about 100 yards. That's how small that city was at that point. By the time Solomon reigns, more than twice that size. And of course, it just continues to grow. But not at this point. But that's what it is. So you think about that. Jerusalem, the city of David, or even this idea of Zion. Well, why even note such a thing? Why even take a moment to say something about Zion? Well, because if you are reading your New Testament, and maybe you would come to the book of Hebrews, I don't know, maybe you would be reading Hebrews chapter 12, and you think about, well, this is the Hebrew writer inspired to write this book to New Testament Christians. He says in verse 18, you're not coming to a mount that may be touched, that burned with fire unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that no word more should be spoken unto them. And your mind's already racing back. That sounds like those events that unfolded when God appeared on Mount Sinai, that mountain. Sure enough, that's what he's writing about. This is a contrast here between two mountains. They, back then, they could not endure that which was enjoined. Even if a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned. And so fearful was the appearance. This is the only place we find this out. This isn't even talked about when it happened. But the Hebrew writer tells us that even Moses, said, I exceedingly fear and quake. He never said that. It was never recorded in his own words. But it's recorded here. And then in verse 22, as this writer writes to these Christians, in contrast to that mountain, he says, but you have come to Mount Zion. What? Unto the city of the living God, the heavenly what? Jerusalem. So now I'm just kind of like, wow, okay, it's kind of making some sense. I've got this Zion over here. It's actually going to become the physical city of Jerusalem. And now I've got this spiritual Zion over here, this heavenly Jerusalem, as he would write to those. So that's maybe why we ought to stop and kind of be reminded where the history of all that started. Right there. Right there, this city had no significance as far as these people were concerned. And yet all the while, the great sovereign in heaven had all this plan already set up. Already knew all this would transpire. Exactly when he expected it. These things are not happening by chance. David isn't conquering this city at this point just by chance. It's all in God's plan. Before it's even happening, he's able to look forward and see all these things happening. Not just the Father, the Godhead or hood, as they would be united in all this. You say, well, Robert, I can't wrap my mind around that. Yeah, I get it. But that doesn't change it one bit. Now these, he begins to say, are the chief of the mighty men. We looked at these before, whom David had, who showed themselves strong with him in his kingdom. So David is going to wax, verse 9, greater and greater. He's just becoming a greater king and a greater man. And the reason he's able to achieve greatness, let's clarify that. The reason he's able to achieve biblical greatness is because he is associated with, because he is a believer in, because he is a follower of the commands of. That is why he achieves biblical greatness. Now, in the eyes of people of the world, maybe they might have considered him great in many ways based upon his kingdom and the expansion of that. But the comment that's made here is more than just how he grows as far as his armies, as far as his wealth is concerned. But one reason, again, David is great because he has great people around him. He's surrounded by great people, great warriors. David was a great warrior, and no doubt he was a great warrior because he had other great warriors to train with and against, and they sharpened his skills. And some of them are named, just like this one in verse 10. These who showed themselves strong with him in his kingdom, together with all Israel, to make him king according to the word of Jehovah concerning Israel. And this is a number of the mighty men whom David had. And you have this one guy, Jeshobeam, chief of the captains. He lifted up his spear, and hundreds that he killed in battle at one time. And then there's another guy, Eleazar. And then in verse 13, there's a time when the Philistines were gathered to battle, and there was this plot of ground that was full of barley, and all the people ran for high hills and left David and a few with some of the strong people, and they stood there. He with the mighty men, just a few of them, they stood there in the midst of that plot and defended it. David, that little shepherd boy, watching over those sheep, has matured at this point. This man This is not the guy you'd want to mess with physically out on the battlefield. It's just not going to work out well for us. This guy is a warrior, and he is surrounded by others who are equal as far as talent is concerned, as far as just grit, as far as they're just not going to give up. You may knock them a few times and they may go down, but I'll tell you what, they're coming back. They're not running. And then you have 3 of the 30 men mentioned in verse 15, talking about a time at this cave of Adullam, which we noted before. And the host of the Philistines were encamped in the valleys of Rephaim, and David was in the stronghold, and David was so thirsty and just makes this remark off the cuff. Man, I wish I had a drink of water, verse 17, and I wish I could have some water from the well of Bethlehem. Well, what do 3 of his people do? Well, they say, well, let's go get him some. And so they broke through the host of the Philistines. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the host of Philistines just kind of watching, and all of a sudden, here comes 3 guys? And you're thinking, we got this, and before you know it, they just whipped up on you guys, and then they go in and get some water, and they come back. I don't know if they had to go through them again, but they come back. They bring David this water. You just imagine, I don't know if it was in a cup, some kind of bucket. I don't know. But here it is, and David gets it. You know he's even thirstier now. You know they're really thirsty. And then David begins to just process all this. I can't drink this. Look at the figurative language that he uses. God forbid that I should do this, that I should drink the blood of these men. Well, they didn't put their blood in the bucket, right? They had just sacrificed. They were willing to shed their blood to go get their king some water. That's the kind of love that they had for him. We'll see something about their heart and the hearts of people, and it's really a great lesson for us too, but we may not get to it today. But it's later on. Maybe you'll see it. Maybe you have already. God forbid that I should do this, that I should drink the blood of these men that put their lives in jeopardy. So he pours out the drink, in essence, as an offering to God. You have this guy, Abishai. He's the brother of Joab. Abishai, the brother of Joab, he was a chief of 3. He lifted up his spear against 300. Of the 3, he was more honorable. You have this guy, Benaiah. We have already read a lot about him. I kind of mentioned that he will be, again, with David quite a bit during his reign. In fact, he kind of becomes his number 1 guy to sort of like go take care of a specific matter. And remember, the language in the American Standard was he would always go fall on them. We kind of thought that was kind of funny. I don't know if he was a big guy or not, but I don't think he actually fell physically on them. He just would use some sort of weapon and take care of whoever it was that David said, you need to go take care of that guy. Well, this guy, I mean, all kinds of mighty deeds. He slew 2 sons of this guy of Moab. He also went down into a pit, and he slew a lion during the time of snow. I mean, that wouldn't have been something I would have been looking to do. There was an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits high, so wow, 8 or 9 feet tall, something along that line. And he had in his hand a spear. Well, that didn't frighten him. He just went down there, took the spear out of the Egyptian's hands, and just slew him with his own spear. So you have these different feats, great feats that are assigned to these mighty men. And then there's the list that begins in verse 26. And you're going, oh, I thought we got past all those names. Well, here we go again. And they're listed here for you. And if you read through there might have been one of those mighty men somewhere between 36 and 47 that caught your attention. Uriah, that was verse 41. And you think, oh, Uriah, that's right. Uriah was one of his mighty men. And Uriah came into the life of David in regards to his wife Bathsheba and lost Uriah, lost his life. David held responsible for his murder, forgiven, but again charged for it. Anything in regards to chapter 11? Yes, Brother Jim.
Joab is not mentioned at all. He's a liar and a murderer.
It is interesting, as Brother Jim notes that Joab isn't mentioned in regards to, if we go back and look at him earlier, had quite a bit. Again, there's a lot of things that you're not going to see that the chronicler takes note of. It's a different angle, and it's at a different time It's a looking back. Again, obviously, if this Holy Spirit is inspired, whoever this writer might have been, Ezra, somebody along that line, again, he's going to write exactly what needs to be written for the sake of these people. If they want to know more about these details, well, they could go back and they could read the scrolls that had been written earlier. Anything else? Well, in chapter 12, these are they that came to David to Ziklag while he yet himself close because of Saul the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men, his helpers in war. They were armed with bows and could use both right hand, left hand in slinging stones. Think about that ability, and in shooting arrows from the bow. They were Saul's brethren of Benjamin. And then we're given their names down through the end of verse 7. So when you get to chapter 12, you'll have verse 1. You're going to have something said in verse 8 regarding the Gadites. They're separated themselves unto David. And you're going to have there in verse 16, there came some of the children of Benjamin, so they defect from Saul and his leadership. What you're having here is you're having some of the things that are happening during the time in which Saul was still alive. These are just some of the people that are coming over on David's side. Again, initially that will be a very small army, but like in chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, if we just for a moment went back to 1 Samuel 27, I could go back to 1 Samuel 27 and plug that in regard to those who came to David to Ziklag. Well, what was going on there? Well, David in chapter 27 of 1 Samuel, because Saul is still pursuing him, and even though Saul has said, okay, well, David, I'm not going to do it anymore, David's saying, you know what? I know in my heart, he said, I know I'm going to perish one day by the hand of Saul. Nothing. There is nothing better for me than I should escape to the land of the Philistines. And Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in the borders of Israel, so I shall escape his hand. He arose, he passed over 600 men that were with him. So you see, there's already been some who are beginning to follow with him. Not everybody yet. He hasn't been made king of Israel yet. He's just reigning over Hebron. He's just got a small following. And he and 600 men, again, that were with him, came to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And he dwelt with Achish, he and his men, every man with his household. David had his two wives with him, Ahinoam and Abigail. You could go back and remember the story about that. She was Nabal's wife, something about that, and him being a fool. And it was told Saul that David was fled to Gath. And the Bible says, Saul sought no more again for him. And David said to Achish, if I found favor in your sight, let them give me a place in one of the cities in the country that I may dwell there. For why should thy servant dwell in the royal city with thee? And Achish gave him Ziklag, that city. Wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Israel to this day. And the number of the days that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. So I have that. I can take something like that and I can come back over to 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Now these are they that came to David in Ziklag. Why is he over there? Why is he in Ziklag? Well, now I can remember why he's there. And these people came, and then the Gadites came, and then some of the children of Manasseh came in verse 16, and then Manasseh also in verse 19. Some of them fell away to David. So you have these that are happening, and then you begin in verse 23. These are the numbers of the heads of them that were armed for war who came to David to Hebron. So he's already ruling for 7.5 years, but now Saul's dead, Ishbosheth is dead, time has passed, and now if we think about what we read initially this morning, then all Israel gathered themselves to David to Hebron, saying, behold, we are your bone, we are your flesh. Time's passed. Even when Saul was king, you were the main guy. You were the one that God said will be shepherd of my people, and we're coming here, and now we're going to follow you. So you have, as you read between that and this, you've had some of the people who have left and come to help David interim while he's just ruling in Hebron. But now, as verse 23 reads, you're having everybody who's basically showing up, and you can go through and you can read all the tribes, how many came, and now everybody's there to declare you're king. We're going to make you king, and you're not staying here in Hebron anymore. We're taking you back to where? Well, I don't know. Let's just read about it. These, verse 38, being men of war, could order the battle array. They came. Now, I noted this earlier. We don't have time for it this morning, but just look at this. They came, the American Standard reads, they came with a perfect heart. What does yours read? A whole heart. They came with a perfect heart. They came with a whole heart to Hebron. Sounds like that they were united in what they were doing, not divided in regards to their king. Wholehearted. They came to make David king over Israel, and all the rest of Israel were of, mine says, one heart. What yours says? One mind. Single-minded. Think about those words, perfect heart, single-minded. And they were with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their brethren had made preparation. And it talks about all the food that's been brought. And so now they're going to make David king, and they're going to bring him back, and they're going to bring him back to where? Well, they're going to bring him back to his city. They're going to bring him back to Jerusalem, and he is going to rule from this time forward from there. Any comments down through chapter 12? Okay, chapter 13 is going to come up something regarding the Ark of the Covenant. I think the Ark of the Covenant. That's something that Moses was instructed to make a long time ago. A lot of time has passed between then and now. Then you're thinking, I kind of remember what it looked like because I saw it in the movie. And then you're thinking, let's see, where was that? That was supposed to be in something and even somewhere in something. But then you're kind of thinking, well, where has it been? Well, I'm not going to tell you. You got a whole week to go back and figure out where it's been. And in addition to that, begin to think about how long it's been there. A lot of time has passed. Samuel has lived his entire life doing the things that he did as priest. And guess what has not been in the Holy of Holies throughout his entire reign as judge, prophet, as priest? Hadn't been there. It's been somewhere with somebody, and time has passed. But I've already given you more than I should have. Now you don't have, like, half your homework is done. Any final comments? Okay, we'll pick up 1 Chronicles chapter 13 next week. Thank you.